It begins as all revolutions do, with a promise. In 2006, in a small office in Stockholm, Sweden, two entrepreneurs, Daniel Ek and Martin Lorentzon, set out to solve what was then the music industry's greatest fear: piracy. Napster had come and gone, but the damage remained. LimeWire, BitTorrent, and countless MP3 blogs had gutted album sales, unraveled distribution models, and exposed how fragile the music economy really was. Listeners wanted instant access, artists wanted to be paid, labels wanted control, and no one could agree on a solution. Spotify offered one, with a sleek interface, instant playback, and a massive song library available for free with ads, or ad-free for a monthly fee. It felt like the future. By the time Spotify launched in the US in 2011, it had already transformed European listening habits. Music lovers embraced it, labels reluctantly partnered, and artists didn't have much choice. Spotify's pitch was clear: it would fight piracy, compensate creators, and democratize music discovery. But buried beneath the UI, beyond the playlists and behind the algorithms, was a business model that would come to define the new music economy and quietly exploit the very creators it claimed to serve. Because Spotify didn't just change how we listen to music, it changed how music was valued. To understand the depth of that transformation, we have to go back to the early mechanics of music monetization. Before streaming, artists earned money in three primary ways: album sales, touring, and licensing. Selling a physical or digital album meant direct revenue. A $10 CD sale might translate to $2 or $3 for the artist more if they owned the rights. Touring could be lucrative for those who drew crowds. Licensing a song to film or television could deliver a financial windfall. These income streams were imperfect but tangible. Streaming rewrote the rules. Under Spotify's royalty model, artists don't earn a fixed rate per stream. Instead, Spotify uses a pro-rata system. All the money generated from ads and subscriptions goes into a giant pot, and that pot is divided based on share of total streams. In other words, if your song makes up 1% of all streams on the platform in a given month, you earn 1% of the revenue pool, regardless of how many listeners you brought to the platform or whether they paid to subscribe. On the surface, it sounds fair. In practice, it benefits the already powerful and leaves everyone else behind. Take a moment to consider this: Spotify currently pays artists between $0.03 and $0.05 per stream. That means to earn just $1,000, a song needs around $250,000 to $330,000 streams. To earn minimum wage in the US, about $15,000 a year, an artist would need roughly 4 million streams annually. For independent musicians without label backing, marketing budgets, or playlist placement, those numbers are often unreachable. But it goes deeper than math. Spotify's algorithm favors frequency over depth. Songs that are short, repeatable, and algorithmically catchy are more likely to be pushed to users. As a result, musicians have adapted, releasing more singles instead of albums, shortening track lengths, front-loading hooks to keep skip rates low. Art has bent to the will of the platform. Meanwhile, Spotify has quietly shifted from being a music company to a tech company. Its valuation is based not on the number of artists it uplifts, but on its growth potential, its data, its engineering. The company went public in 2018 with a valuation of over $26 billion. Investors didn't ask how much it paid artists. They asked how much it could grow. To maintain leverage, Spotify made deals. It cut sweetheart agreements with major labels, Universal, Sony, and Warner, that gave them preferential royalty rates, equity stakes in the company, and influence over playlist placement. These labels in turn recouped their investments from the artists they controlled. Independent musicians, meanwhile, were left to navigate a system that was opaque by design. Playlisting became the new radio. Getting on a major Spotify playlist. Rap Caviar Today's top hits R&B could mean millions of streams overnight, but the process was a black box. Curators operated in shadows. Payola, once a dirty word in the radio era, quietly returned under new disguises: marketing agencies, influencer placement, and promotional fees. Some artists paid thousands just for the hope of being noticed. Others never had the chance. Then came the fake artist controversy. In 2017, investigative reports suggested that Spotify was filling its curated playlists with music from fake artists, pseudonymous composers, signed directly to Spotify, producing ambient tracks, generic jazz, or instrumental mood pieces. The benefit: Spotify didn't have to pay traditional royalties. By padding playlists with in-house content, the company saved millions. Spotify denied wrongdoing, but the practice continued cloaked in NDAs and anonymous production credits. For artists who poured their lives into songwriting, performing, and recording, it was a punch in the gut. But the most insidious shift was cultural. Streaming platforms like Spotify reframed music as background. Playlists like Deep Focus Mood Booster and Chill Vibes transformed music from an experience to a product. No longer was a song something to sit with, it was a utility. Something to fill silence power workouts or soothe anxiety. Musicians became content creators. Songs became data points. And yet the narrative remained: Spotify had saved the music industry. It's true that streaming now makes up over 80% of global recorded music revenue. Piracy has declined. Listeners have more access than ever before. But who benefits? The answer is clear: major labels, tech investors, and the company itself. Daniel Ek, Spotify's co-founder, is now worth billions. In 2020, he made headlines by investing over $100 million into an AI-powered defense tech company. His logic: musicians weren't producing content fast enough. You can't record music once every 3 to 4 years and think that's going to be enough, he said. To many artists, it was a declaration of war. The spotlight flickers, the song hits 1 million plays, a moment of validation, a hit on a playlist, a viral loop on TikTok, a quick rise through Spotify's algorithmic ladders. But when the artist checks their bank account, something doesn't add up. 1 million plays, maybe $3,000, before taxes, before the distributor takes a cut, before rent, before the next single has to be recorded, mixed, mastered, and promoted. That's when the illusion begins to crack. Streaming promised artists exposure. But exposure, it turns out, doesn't pay the bills. In the pre-streaming era, the measure of success was simple sales. A sold-out CD, a gold record, a platinum album. Even modest success meant financial stability. Today, success is measured in streams, massive, ephemeral numbers that sound impressive, but rarely translate into sustainable income. Meet Annie, an independent singer-songwriter based in Nashville. In 2022, she released an album funded through crowdfunding and long studio nights. The album reached 1.5 million streams in its first year, what should have been a triumph. But her actual income from Spotify totaled just under $5,000, not per month, for the entire year. After studio costs, session musicians, mastering, artwork, marketing, and touring, she was in the red. Annie's story is not unique. It's the norm. The vast majority of Spotify's 11 million creators earn less than $1,000 annually from the platform. In fact, according to Spotify's own 2023 Loud and Clear report, only about 16,500 artists globally made more than $50,000 per year in streaming revenue. That's out of millions of active musicians. Most make next to nothing. Spotify defends its payout model by saying it pays out billions annually to rights holders. But that phrase, rights holders, is where the truth hides. Because in many cases, the people who receive Spotify's payouts aren't the artists themselves. They're the labels, publishers, and corporations that own the masters and publishing rights. Artists, especially those under major labels, often see just a fraction of the pie. And while the big three, Universal, Sony, and Warner, own a significant percentage of Spotify itself, independent musicians do not. This is where the new exploitation begins. With streaming data as the new currency, record labels have retooled their contracts to extract maximum value. Today, it's common for young artists to sign 360 deals agreements that give labels a share of everything: music sales, touring, merch, brand deals, even YouTube revenue. In exchange, artists receive upfront advances which are often treated as debt. Streaming has allowed labels to become more risk-averse and data-obsessed. Gone are the days of artist development. Instead, labels now scout Spotify metrics, monthly listeners, playlist traction, TikTok virality, and use algorithms to decide who to sign. It's not about potential, it's about performance metrics. But the moment an artist signs, the exploitation deepens. The label now owns the masters. The artist gets a percentage, often less than 20% of net revenue. Any advance they received must be recouped before they see another dime. And because Spotify's payout per stream is so low, artists stay in debt longer. For many, forever. Streaming wasn't supposed to be this way. It was supposed to free musicians from gatekeepers. But instead, it created new ones. Curators, algorithms, playlist editors, all unseen, all unaccountable. Artists spend thousands hiring PR firms or marketing pluggers just to get noticed by a Spotify editor. Others are offered placements for a price. The old payola reborn. And as artists race to stay relevant in a system that demands constant output, burnout is epidemic. Because the streaming model doesn't reward longevity, it rewards volume. Spotify's algorithm favors those who release frequently, engage constantly, and create music that fits within tightly defined genre boundaries. Songs that perform well on playlists get more visibility. Songs that don't are buried. As a result, musicians alter their art, shorter intros, less variation, high chorus repeatability, just to survive the algorithm. Even jazz, classical, and experimental genres have been flattened to fit the mold. A 7-minute song is now a liability. An album is an afterthought. Depth is punished. Surface is everything. And then there's the rise of functional music tracks, created specifically for moods playlists and background listening. Lo-fi beats, meditation tracks, fake jazz trios, anonymous instrumentalists. Many are ghost-written or even AI-generated. Some are commissioned by Spotify itself through third-party shell companies. These tracks crowd out real artists, flood the market, and siphon millions from the royalty pool money that could have gone to working musicians. Spotify, of course, denies any wrongdoing. It claims to support artists through programs like Spotify for Artists promotional tools and transparency dashboards. But the underlying math doesn't change. If the pie is small and your slice is microscopic, it doesn't matter how clearly the company shows you your stats. The issue isn't transparency, it's power. Power that artists don't have. Because Spotify's model, like the attention economy itself, is designed for extraction. It mines time, emotion, and art, then monetizes it for shareholders. Musicians become content farms. Songs become scrollable assets. And the joy of music, the connection between artist and listener, is reduced to metrics on a dashboard. Some artists are pushing back. In the UK, a parliamentary inquiry into streaming royalties recommended a complete overhaul of the pro rata system. Musicians and unions demanded a shift to the user-centric model, where royalties would be paid based on what individual users actually listen to, not who gets the most streams globally. Spotify resisted. Why? Because the current system favors big players. A user who listens exclusively to indie artists still has their subscription dollars split among Ed Sheeran, Drake, and Taylor Swift, because those artists dominate total plays. The more concentrated the listens, the more concentrated the revenue. It's efficient, it's scalable, and it's deeply unfair. By 2020, the evidence was overwhelming. Spotify had reshaped the music industry, but not for the better. With each quarterly earnings report, the numbers climbed: more users, more subscriptions, more listening hours. But as Spotify's valuations soared beyond $60 billion, the questions grew louder: who was benefiting, and who was being left behind? Musicians had seen enough. That year, a coalition of artists, small labels, and music workers formed the Union of Musicians and Allied Workers, UMAW. Their mission was simple: demand justice from Spotify. Their campaign, called Justice at Spotify, presented clear demands: raise per-stream payouts to at least 1 cent, end payola schemes, make algorithmic processes transparent, and stop promoting fake artists. Spotify ignored them. So they marched. In dozens of cities from New York to London, São Paulo to Berlin, musicians gathered outside Spotify offices. They held signs that read, "Spotify, the new sweatshop, and streaming is killing music." Some protested in silence, holding their royalty statements aloft, like receipts of betrayal. Others blasted their own songs through megaphones, chanting for dignity. But even as Spotify dismissed their demands, the protests sparked something far more powerful than policy change. It sparked solidarity. Musicians who had once been siloed, divided by genre, geography, or scale, began comparing notes. Veteran jazz musicians found common ground with bedroom pop producers. Tour-weary punks stood alongside classical violinists. A shared language emerged, one of precarity, disillusionment, and the realization that the enemy wasn't piracy anymore. It was the platform. This awakening wasn't just political, it was cultural. The streaming model had done more than shift revenue streams. It had eroded the soul of music itself. Songs were being written for algorithms, not audiences. Albums were fragmented. Creativity was confined to what fit neatly into Spotify's editorial boxes. The art of musical risk-long intros, experimental instrumentation, genre fusion was being sidelined in favor of what performed. But something else was rising beneath the surface. Platforms like Bandcamp had long existed as an alternative. There, artists set their own prices, keep around 85% of revenues, and are directly supported by fans. Bandcamp Fridays, a once-a-month event where the platform waives its cut, entirely became a symbol of resistance, a way for fans to redistribute wealth to creators. Artists began migrating. Some, like singer-songwriter Zola Jesus, publicly deleted their Spotify accounts, calling the platform parasitic. Others, like singer David Lowery of Camper Van Beethoven, filed lawsuits demanding fair royalties and transparency in streaming payments. Lowery even launched a website, The Tricordist, exposing exploitative label contracts and advocating for fairer deals. Tech-savvy musicians went even further. In 2022, blockchain-based streaming platforms like Audius and Catalog promised decentralized music economies where payments would be transparent, royalties immutable, and power returned to creators. Though still in their infancy, these platforms attracted artists frustrated with Spotify's opacity and major label domination. But the battle was never just digital. In the UK, the Musicians' Union launched a parliamentary inquiry into streaming's economic impact. Their findings were stark. The majority of artists earned less than minimum wage from streaming. The government called for a complete reset of how streaming royalties were distributed. One MP likened Spotify to a digital plantation, profiting from the labor of others while returning almost nothing. In France, lawmakers proposed a streaming tax to fund musicians. In Germany, independent collectives built cooperatively owned streaming alternatives. And in Brazil, artists used streaming data to expose racial inequities in playlisting and promotion. The question shifted from can we fix Spotify to can we replace it? Because the truth was, Spotify didn't just exploit musicians, it redefined what it meant to be one. It transformed the role of the artist from creator to content producer, forced into an endless cycle of output to remain relevant. It rewarded not those who made the best music, but those who gamed the system best. Spotify, like so many platforms, had inherited the logic of Silicon Valley growth at all costs. Scale over sustainability, optimization over art. And that logic infected every part of the music pipeline. Major labels began using Spotify data to dictate artist behavior. Managers pressured musicians to chase playlist hits. Labels signed artists based on social media metrics, not talent. The line between art and marketing blurred beyond recognition. But despite this, the resistance continued. Grassroots collectives like Black Bandcamp emerged to highlight and support Black artists, overlooked by Spotify's algorithms. Feminist and queer music networks organized campaigns to expose gender bias in playlisting. Indigenous artists from Canada and Australia used their own platforms to challenge the cultural erasure Spotify's playlists often perpetuated. They weren't just demanding money. They were demanding recognition, representation, reparations. And through it all, Spotify kept releasing press releases announcing new tools, artist dashboards, analytics, and promotional services. It celebrated how many artists had hit 1 million streams, but it never said how many of them could pay their rent. As artists fought for survival, Spotify pushed deeper into podcasting. In 2019, it acquired Gimlet Media and Anchor. Then, it inked a $100 million deal with Joe Rogan, a clear signal that spoken word content was now more valuable than music. By 2023, Spotify had spent over $1 billion building its podcast empire. Why? Because podcasts were cheaper to license, easier to monetize, and unlike musicians, podcasters didn't demand fair pay for every stream. They signed exclusivity deals, they built brands, they sold ads. They were in every sense more profitable. Music became background noise in its own industry. The revolution will not be playlisted, not on Spotify's top 50, not in its algorithmic release radar. not in a branded podcast. Because the revolution that artists seek, the one that now echoes through underground venues, online forums, cooperatives and virtual protests, cannot be confined to a stream count or compressed into 30-second snippets of catchy familiarity. It is a revolution of values. It begins with a simple realization that music is not a utility. It is a living, breathing relationship between artist and audience, an act of rebellion, remembrance, imagination. And for too long, that relationship has been twisted by platforms built not to support creation, but to extract value from it. So what does a better future look like? It starts by flipping the model. Instead of mass-market exploitation, we move toward community-based ecosystems. Musicians aren't content providers, they are cultural workers. Just as we value teachers, nurses, and farmers, we must value those who soundtrack our lives. That means fair compensation not as a perk, but as a baseline. Some are already building this world. Cooperative streaming platforms are emerging like Resonate, where users and musicians co-own the system and revenue is shared equitably. In this model, listening isn't endless and passive. It's intentional. The more a listener plays a song, the more they pay until they eventually own the track. It's streaming with memory, with commitment. Elsewhere, direct-to-fan models are gaining strength. Platforms like Bandcamp, Patreon, and even Substack for musicians allow artists to build communities that support them directly. They offer early access, behind-the-scenes content, limited editions, and most importantly, connection. Not in likes, not in metrics, but in dialogue, in mutual respect. But building alternatives isn't just about platforms. It's about policy. Around the world, governments are waking up to the streaming crisis. In Canada, new legislation forces platforms to promote local content. In South Korea, artists receive stronger copyright protections against exploitative label deals. In the EU, the Digital Services Act and AI Act are setting the groundwork for fairer digital economies. These changes matter, because regulation, when designed with artists at the table, can curb the worst excesses of platform capitalism. But it's not enough, because the change that's needed is not just structural, it's cultural. We, the listeners, must unlearn what Spotify taught us, that music is infinite, free, and disposable, that 100 songs are worth a monthly fee cheaper than a sandwich, that it's normal for a company to pay the creator of your favorite song less than half a cent per stream, while its CEO invests in AI weapons and brags about profit margins. We must listen differently, not just to the song, but to the silence behind it. The late nights, the debt, the rented studio, the unpaid collaborators, the work that made it real. When we press play, we are not just streaming data. We are participating in an economy, one that either feeds the artist or starves them. Some are already listening. In 2023, a viral campaign titled "Won't Cancel Spotify Wrapped" encouraged users to skip Spotify's annual streaming nostalgia. Instead, it urged them to share the names of the independent artists they supported that year through Bandcamp merch or ticket sales. The campaign wasn't about guilt. It was about remembering that behind every top 5 artists are lives, not just brands. At festivals, artist collectives are now setting up booths not to promote, but to organize. They educate fans about streaming exploitation, push for fan unions, and distribute zines with names of musicians who've left Spotify and why. The message is simple. Music is a relationship, and relationships need care. Still, Spotify remains dominant. With over 600 million users, its cultural and economic power is unmatched. And for many artists, leaving isn't a viable option. It's not because they want to be there, but because they can't afford not to be. Their presence is their visibility. Their silence is their erasure. Which brings us back to the core contradiction. Spotify's brilliance was never in its technology. It was in convincing the world that it saved music, when in reality, it rewrote the rules to benefit itself. It shifted blame onto pirates, then built an empire that pays creators barely more. It branded itself as democratizing music while ensuring that only the most streamed voices survive. It promised a better world. What it delivered was convenience. And convenience, as history shows, is the easiest path to exploitation. But the story isn't over, because as long as musicians keep creating, there will be a hunger for better. for models that honor the slow craft of songwriting, that reward not just virality, but vulnerability, that allow a folk singer in Colombia, a techno producer in Nairobi, a cellist in Poland, to thrive, not because they hacked the algorithm, but because they moved someone's soul. The future of music isn't in charts, it's in choice. It's in platforms that don't require scale to be sustainable. It's in laws that reflect dignity over data. It's in fans who understand that art without artists is nothing. And most of all, it's in remembering that songs are not just products. They are the stories we return to when everything else falls apart. And those who create them deserve more than fractions of a cent. They deserve a world that listens,